All right, I know what everyone's thinking. Where's my favorite podcast host, Zachary Young? Don't worry, he'll be back. He's got a lot of big things going on, starting his career in security. But that doesn't mean he won't be back. He should be back for the next episode, so expect him back soon. For now, it's going to be me and Holden, and we're gonna do a little bit of a recap for the Bellator that happened this past weekend, Bellator 263. But yeah, any initial thoughts?
Yeah, starting at the bottom of the card, somebody I know that you've actually interviewed, somebody that you've ridden on a fair amount, Goty Yamauchi, with an amazing first round finish. I thought that was a great way to start off what ended up being an incredible main card, and it was definitely Bellator's biggest event of all time. It was a pretty crazy card.
Yeah, it was a crazy way to open it actually, because I honestly do think he's one of the most underrated lightweights in the world. I've talked about the Bellator versus UFC levels, but Goiti he hung in there with Michael Chandler in the past, and now he came in as like the most feared submission artist in the promotion. But he fucking showed his hands like crazy, bro. Like his striking has become so insanely dangerous. And going into it, like we saw his boxing, but he also has that sweet hook kick that he lands a lot too. Like it's really all coming together.
Yeah, no, for sure. His striking looked awesome. In the post-fight interview, I was happy to hear that he said, yeah, he actually wants to show more of his striking, show more of the complete fighter that he is. What do you think of the fact that his opponent was only 6-0? Goty obviously being fifth ranked in Bellator. He just lost a very controversial decision. So like what do you think of for such a controversial loss?
Yeah, it's a weird one, right? Because I was very, very surprised in the fight before with Moret that the judges gave it the other way. But I think you got to remember like the rankings in Bellator are like relatively recent. So even though he's always been at the top of the division unofficially, uh, because it's so new, you have there's a lot of opportunity for people to try to jump into the rankings. Like they're still kind of trying to like solidify them a little bit, I think. And I think because of the controversial loss coming into the last one, the reason Yamauchi ended up with someone who was just 6-0 was because he wanted a quick turnaround. And I think it was relatively not like super short notice, but he was just really gunning to get a fight so that he could get it back and get that momentum rolling again. So it wasn't like I don't think it was a big process of like looking for the correct opponent, if that makes sense.
Yeah, that makes a lot of sense. that definitely makes a lot of sense. But yeah, Goty really impressed me. Moving on from Goty Yamauchi. Well, I guess moving on. Yeah, be on a 3-fight win skid. He lost that controversial decision. Now he has one more win in the win column. Seen from him next, do like that's I don't think that's enough to get him a shot at Pitbull for that lightweight title. But I don't know what Bellator's plans are, if they want to do a lightweight Grand Prix or whatever. But I'd like to see Goty get another shot up in one of the top 5 guys, and then hopefully get a title shot pretty soon, because he's been impressing me a lot lately. I know Michael Chandler beat him, but ever since then he's looked solid, as solid as you can.
Yeah, it is a bit of a weird one at lightweight, right? Because the division's kind of been playing out, but because Pitbull's been jumping back and he was the featherweight champion up till Saturday, um, I don't think the lightweight belt's been defended for about 2 years. I think it was 2019 when it was last fought for. So things have played out, but I think now that he's lost the featherweight belt and he's going, I would assume maybe going back to lightweight to defend that belt. Um, Things need to start clicking more into place. Like the top 5 needs to start fighting the top 5 and like solidifying and like really pushing for their own shot.
Yeah, 100%. I think another thing that stood out to me was on the main card there were 2 close fights. One a bit of a sleeper, but one an incredible back-to-back war, round-to-round war. Um, so just starting off with kind of the sleeper, I thought that Brent Primus won that fight. I know you might have a different opinion on this, but I thought really Mamedov, he held top position, but he didn't do anything in the fight. And when you talk about you talk about a fight, you talk about damage, you talk about looking for opportunities to finish, you talk about controlling. But I thought Primus did well on the feet. Mamedov took him down, but then he just laid on him. And anytime he was able to pass position, Brent Primus was able to bring him back. Most of that fight was spent in that mission control position, which I always find as an advantageous position for the bottom guy. Like, I wouldn't say that's a top control position because there was no effective ground and pound landed. Gogo Plata was gone for a few times. The only Plata was on for a few and more active in that fight. So I was a bit shocked by that decision. I don't know what you thought of that.
I'm very on the fence. I think it's one of those fights where I actually wouldn't be upset if it went either way. And I do agree with you that top position shouldn't win you fights alone. I think if you take someone down, you should do something with it in order to score. The reason that I think there is an argument for is it Mamedov? Sorry, I just
Yeah.
had a little bit of a brain switch, but so I think where we also disagree is that I think Mamedov was actually winning the stand-up. I know you think it was the other way because of the harder shots, but I actually don't think there was much landed at that beginning, especially in the first round. But I think Mamedov landed just a little bit more to edge it out. It was relatively uneventful on the feet before things were taken down. So that's why I could lean to Mamedov for the first round. Second round, I agree with you. Third round, the thing with the mission control position and going for that Gogo Plata is it already hadn't worked for the first 2 rounds of the fight so many times, and the escape was the same way so many times. So I think if he mixed it up and went for something else, it would have been more threatening, but it essentially kept going to a stall position. It was the same sequence over and over and over again. So I have a hard time scoring that as particularly threatening.
Yeah.
Just
For
in
me
the third
personally,
round.
I had the third round for Mamedov. Yeah, I had the third round for Mamedov. In the first round, I thought even striking aside because I thought the first round was the close one of the I'm pretty sure it was the omoplata. No, it might have been the Gogo. I don't know. It was one of the two.
No, sorry,
And
omoplata. My bad. My bad.
I
It
thought
was
he was
omoplata.
yeah, yeah. He had the omoplata, and it was a bit closer. Obviously, he never got to a position where I thought it was really too threatening for Mamedov. But even in the first round, I thought Brent Primus did enough on the ground to win the fight. To your point, I think Mamedov did land a bit more. There were a few pretty hard right hands from Primus. When he got him against the cage, he was landing those inside knees and then landed a few of those. He just popped back and landed a few of those hard elbows. So I don't know. It's definitely not a robbery like we've seen recently, but it was definitely a closer fight. Same with Emmanuel Sanchez and Mads Burnell. They had a close fight as well. I wouldn't call that a robbery from Emmanuel Sanchez. I personally scored it 2-1 for Emmanuel Sanchez, but that was an absolute barn burner of a fight leading into the main event. What did you think of that?
Yeah, I was also torn. I wasn't sure who was gonna go to, but when I heard that the score definitely shouldn't have been 30-27. I disagree with that. But when I heard it was 30-27, I was confident that Mads had won. Only because I think in the second round it was extremely, extremely close, and then Mads got the takedown. And then I think Mads definitely won round 3. But I
Yeah.
think it literally came down to that second round. And same thing, like I said before, I think if you get a takedown, you need to do something with it. I'm more to that side of thinking. But if it's razor thin and it comes down to that last minute, and the only difference you can make is somebody gets the takedown, then I think you can use that to score. Just to like differentiate.
Yeah. I guess my point for Manuel Sanchez, when you look at those first 2 rounds, is Mads Burnell, other than advancing, especially
All right, sorry about that, guys. Had to fix some technical Wi-Fi difficulties. But we're back now. Anyway, what were you saying about you said you were giving Sanchez a bit of an edge for a certain reason?
Yeah, so I saw like Mads Burnell, especially in the first round, was advancing a lot and looking to land heavy single shots, but the volume was really on the edge of Sanchez. Sanchez was, in my opinion, really piecing him up, causing a lot of damage, even landing some big shots of his own. And you saw Burnell constantly looking for that big body shot. He was constantly looking for the one big shot to the head. I think he was looking for something to gain the respect up high so that he could shoot those shots for his wrestling. Um, but the second round was more of the same until right at the end of the second round, where we saw Burnell get a takedown and look good on the ground. The third round, I had scored for Burnell.
Mhm.
I just found it weird that for the amount of volume that Sanchez put forward in the first two rounds, he was outstriking him. He was more accurate than him. And Burnell, to the like just same point, he was landing these really big, like looking for these really big single shots, but they were hit or miss. So I really had a confident 2 rounds for Manuel Sanchez. I remember when I heard 29, 28, 29, 28, and then 30, 27, I thought, I was actually pretty confident that when Sanchez away, I was like, oh, that's bad judging again. They messed up one of the rounds for Sanchez. And when they gave it to Burnell, I was like, in a fight like that, you don't hate to see like either guy win. But after Sanchez just came off that loss to Pitbull in the tournament, and he was definitely looking for something to bounce back on. I think that was a bit of poor judging that kind of took that away from him there. I thought it was a close fight, but I really was confident that Sanchez had the first 2 rounds at least locked in.
Um, yeah, I same thing. I think it really came down to that second round. I could see it go either way. I think you make a lot of good points. One thing I do want to point out though, something about Mads Burnell that's very interesting is his striking defense is very misleading because it's very small, it's very short things. Like he'll use his shoulder, so he uses his shoulder a lot, and he also um he rolls with punches very well. So it's a lot of like this sort of thing. And what you
Yeah,
get with that is when Emmanuel Sanchez is throwing like these 5 punch combinations, 3 might glance off the shoulder, but when you're watching it in real time so quickly, it looks like he's landing all these things. But if you go back and look at replays, a lot of them look a lot more glancing than they do clean as when you watched it live, I think. And that's just because Burnell has such a weird, like very minute uh striking style. Like same like you're saying, offensively it's very one shot looking for that respect, but defensively it is very like minimizing the damage of each blow. Like they're still landing on something, but a lot of
yeah,
them maybe weren't as impactful as they seemed at the time. Um, what really impressed me with Sanchez was the body work. Those body shots were just beautiful. He was
yeah.
ending combinations on them, and that was what impressed me most about his style that night.
Yeah, I thought Sanchez did really well, and yeah, I'll probably have to rewatch that and kind of see that, to your point, what Burnell was doing defensively, and take nothing away from him. I just, visually it looked like Sanchez, the volume was there, and to your point, he was ending his combinations very well. It just every time you looked at a stand up exchange, it was very obvious who won each single exchange. And it was either, obviously Burnell threw that one big shot and you were like, ooh, good shot for Burnell. Or it was Sanchez leading off with these 3, 4, 5 shot combinations that you could tell who won that exchange. And even though Burnell kept walking forward, if you're getting hit by 5 combos, that's great. That's a Chris Matinho argument. He kept walking forward, but he was getting pieced. And I know those shots were landing cleaner, but it's just to the point of, a fighter is able to keep, even though a fighter is able to keep walking forward, it doesn't mean that they're not, sustaining a decent bit of damage.
Yeah,
Um,
and to the rule set, octagon control, so being in that, like, controlling that center is also supposed to be not a primary means of judging. It's supposed to be something that happens when you can't judge based on the other criteria. Um,
Yeah.
just for people who maybe aren't as familiar with the rule set.
Yeah, for sure. And I know that's a big thing, especially lately. That we see, we've seen a lot lately that with a lot of bad judging decisions, it kind of looks like the guy that supposedly has more octagon control, even though a guy might be piecing him up from the outside. The guy that supposedly has more octagon control kind of comes out as the victor, even though he's either outstruck or she's outstruck or whatever it may be.
Mhm.
Um, Moving on from that, though, to kind of talk about two great things that happened. First, there was Usman Nurmagomedov's absolutely stunning performance. He's 2-0 in Bellator now. He's looking awesome. But there's another Nurmagomedov who's absolutely awesome, and that's Habib Nurmagomedov, who is who is undefeated as a coach. I don't think I know everybody knows how good Habib is. Obviously, he's undefeated in his career, but switching his talents to coaching, we heard Islam Makhachev talk about everything that he does for his athletes when he's coaching them, when he's running a fight camp and everything like that. But obviously, he's doing a lot that's working. Debatable decision to side on Islam Mamedov's point. Every other fight that we've seen with a Habib fighter has been a dominant performance by that fighter, and no matter what, whether they're a wrestler, whether they're a stand-up guy, no matter what. So I think he makes a pretty good contention for coach of the year.
Yeah. I think the difficulty with the coach of the year thing is cornerman 100%, but we haven't seen how much of it is in the gym, how much of it is him and how much of it is Javier, I think. Um, but yeah, definitely. Um, one of the interesting things about Habib and the people that he's training now that I think a lot of people maybe haven't picked up on enough is the thing that made Habib so dominant, and we talked about it earlier with the Mamedov fight, is when you take someone down, you have to do something with it. And Habib was an extremely active and aggressive grappler. He was there to ground and pound you until he smashed you into the submission. It seems like a lot of the guys that's coming up. So Islam Makhachev is supposedly the next Habib, but his wrestling style is very much smush you into the submission, and he's very technical and he doesn't put himself in danger very much. But he's not the kind of guy that just smashes you and damages you the same way Habib does. And when I was watching Mamedov the other night, I kind of got the same sort of vibe, which is what made it so controversial. Had he fought like Habib and he was looking for those opportunities to ground and pound up until he could advance position, would have been different. But he took a much more Islam Makhachev approach in which once you hit the ground, it becomes a grappling match. Um, and he's very dominant, very one dimensional in that aspect. Not dominant in that fight in the sense that obviously we've argued about who won those grappling exchanges, but at a high level of grappling, he goes into that grappling sort of mindset.
Yeah,
You know what I mean? And I find
yeah,
that very interesting in terms of Habib being a coach, but it's not as though these people who, even though they're Dagestani, even though they're wrestlers, even though they're winning dominantly, they're not necessarily fighting like Habib, you know?
yeah. That's something I find pretty crazy too. And I know I said that earlier. Whether they're stand up, whether they're whatever they are, it seems that he's able to see the fight in a good way, in a good way for their fighting style. He's not just pushing his style on fighters, which we see people do. They go to different gyms or they get coaches and they kind of start changing their style and adapting their style to what their coach is doing. It seems that under Habib, these fighters are able to do what works for them just at a higher level. And bringing that into Usman, I forget if he's his cousin or his brother. I always forget. But he had an incredible performance. I thought like it didn't even look like those guys should have been in the same octagon. He looked awesome, and I think he's a real threat in that Bellator. Like talking about Yamauchi in that Bellator lightweight division, and you know that he's a real threat in that division right now, especially for those top five guys. he's shown nothing that looks like he's not going to be as equally a dominant force as Habib was. I know he's 13-0 now, 2-0 Bellator record. I'd like to see him fight a ranked guy next. There was a couple guys on those cards that had like 2-0 Bellator records and stuff like that. Like, I'd like to see them give Nurmagomedov a shot at a ranked fighter, at some really good competition.
Yeah, what's so scary about him is that he looks like a world beater on the feet, and then he has the greatest grappling gym probably in the world backing him, right? Uh, AKA and obviously Coach Habib. But I believe he comes from a striking background, right? Like,
Yeah,
I don't know exactly his history, but I want to say he came from more of a Muay Thai
he started at
competition.
Muay Thai when he was 5.
Okay, yeah. So
Yeah,
yeah. Um but yeah, honestly, I think there's no ceiling on this kid, right? Um and he honestly has probably more, I don't want to say more potential than Khabib, because Khabib's style was very specific and it was a very uh not, I don't want to say safe because maybe that doesn't sound positive, but it's a very, it's a style that could be dominant a lot of times, and there's a lot of risk more so in Usman's strike style because he could always get caught, I think.
yeah.
But at the same time, it looks as though he's going to come in a little bit more well-rounded in the total MMA game, which makes me excited to see him after the Khabib era.
Yeah, I think when you think about MMA, when you think about great skill sets, we always talk about balance. Like, it really is one of those sports where you got to be good everywhere. And Habib really showed that you can dominate in a single facet of it and still be incredible. And Israel Adesanya shows that a lot with his striking. But really, when you think about the greatest of all time, you talk about the John Jones, the Anderson Silvas, the George St. Pierre. These are guys that wherever the fight was, they could dictate the pace of the fight. They could dictate what it's going to look like, and they could play to their advantages. And Usman, to your point, is a guy that he looks like he has the potential to do that because his striking does look world class, which usually you mean you think there's going to be gaps in the wrestling, but his grappling looks world class too. So I'm really excited to see what he has next, what he gets next. Hopefully, he gets a good guy in Bellator. I want to say he should get a, like, I know he's not ranked, but he's a former champion in Brent Primus, but I also don't want to sacrifice Brent Primus for another loss. It feels like almost so. But I think that would be a good test for him. Somebody that's on the verge of ranking or someone at the bottom of the ranking, just to see a step up in competition because I think he's been in the red corner for all of his fights.
Yeah, Brett Primus, I think, uh, would make some sense. Um, you know, a second loss probably isn't the best thing, but it's also this, like you said, this last one's debatable. So it's not as though he would be coming in without momentum, like confidence. Um,
Yeah,
yeah, I think it makes sense. Um, and honestly, it's a name, and like you said, he's only 2-0 in the promotion. So, personally, I could see him fighting maybe someone lower than Brent Primus once more before he gets a name like that. But I mean, I wouldn't have a problem with it.
yeah, fair enough. Well, going from a guy like an Usman who's fairly new to the Bellator organization, there's a guy with 18 fights in the Bellator organization that just became the champion. Talked about a homegrown talent.
Yeah,
He has looked dominant in everything that he's done. He, looked dominant in his victory, first round knockout of Pitbull. And then
actually,
he chose. Oh, sorry.
no, sorry, go ahead.
I was just gonna say, and then he chose to make a call out. Say he's one of the best. It doesn't matter the organization. He's the best featherweight in the world, and he's looking to prove it. And I thought that was a super smart after a great win over Pitbull. And Pitbull was in that conversation of, is he one of the best featherweights in the world? Because obviously he wasn't fighting UFC competition, but he beat Michael Chandler twice. He's looked He's looked incredible in Bellator and just like a dominant force in Bellator. He beat Juan Archuleta, he beat Emmanuel Sanchez, who we talked about earlier. Like he just looked like the dominant force of Bellator, and it was one of those things where people, I know we've been talking, and people have talked about how good is Pitbull really. Well, now that AJ McKee just beat him, he made that call out. He's really increasing his own brand, and I think on the back of like Bellator's greatest event, yeah, it does a lot for Bellator, but I think AJ McKee is a superstar in the making. And talk about another guy that obviously looks really good everywhere. He's knocking out guys, he's submitting guys, he's a smart fighter, he knows how to use his length really well. And then you get him on the ground, and he's tricky. People want to avoid those situations with him because he's always looking for a neck, he's always looking for an arm, he's always looking for something to expose the other guy. I think he has to be, to me, he's one of the smartest fighters to ever come up. And I know calling him a prospect at 18-0 is kind of one of those things where you're like, well, he's already had 18 fights. Like GSP retired at 24, 25 kind of thing. But he's looking incredible. And I think just like Usman, this guy's a glass ceiling. He's going to just break through everything. And I think he's going to be one of the superstars of the sport just by the way he increased his brand, how good he looked in that performance against Pitbull. And, he beat him on the feet and then choked him out. So that just shows a guy that's dominant everywhere against a guy in Pitbull that was dominant everywhere. And I don't know what you thought about that fight. I know you're saying something.
Um, well, just really quickly, the point I wanted to just make, it just popped in my head, is one of the things I think people got to remember is Bellator is interesting in the way that a lot of their top talent was homegrown in the promotion, like you said. And it's actually a lot of times an outlier when you have someone like Usman Nurmagomedov who comes in after a career outside of Bellator for a long time and then hits like the top talent, right? Because if you look at like Goiti, he's had a lot of fights in Bellator. You look at AJ McKee, you look at someone like um, even Michael Chandler when he was back in there. Like when he was at the top, a lot of their fights were in Bellator because Bellator takes you a lot younger in your career than like say UFC would. Um, so sometimes like even if the record doesn't have as high a number, you're fighting in Bellator your whole career, so it almost means more. You're fighting in like they'll let you fight in the top promotion for so long. So AJ McKee, what'd you say? He was 12-0,
He's 18-0.
18-0. Sorry, and those were almost all of Bellator. They might have all been Bellator, right?
Yeah, he started off in Bellator.
So that's insane. Like you said, it's crazy to call him a prospect because 18-0, but it's also 18-0 in Bellator. So yeah, I think he's up in their talks. I don't personally see him beating a lot of the guys in the UFC. There's that debate with Pitbull, like you said, is he among the best in the world? Um, and the reason I say that is not because I don't think that he's UFC caliber or top talent in the world, but the UFC featherweight division right now is particularly insane, right? Like Maro called the Bellator featherweight division the greatest featherweight division in the world. Maybe in another era, but right now in the UFC, it's a Shark Tank.
Yeah, I know, and yeah, I would agree with you there. And I know we were talking about it. I was talking about it with Zach last night that I think it proposes a real problem for him in guys like Volkanovski and guys like Holloway that have, and not to discredit the athleticism of AJ and McKee, and it just seems everything that AJ has, they have more of. Fight IQ, they both know how to make the fight their fight and keep it in their way. Athleticism, I think both you can make an argument that Volkanovski and Holloway have the best cardio in the UFC, and they're both in the featherweight division. And then when you look at like just ability to fight, the accuracy of their strikes, the game plans that they come up with, the adaptability that they have in their fights, then those are very two hard top guys. And I know he said he wants the Ortega fight back because he got choked out by Ortega when he was 19. Um, I'd like to see that. That'd be a cool fight. But I would have to agree with you that I don't think he's on the level of, you know, the upper echelon guys, the guys that you start talking about, like when you start talking about greatest featherweight of all time. When you get into the conversation of the Max Holloways, the Jose Aldos, and now more recently, Volkanovski. I know he hasn't done anything for that conversation yet, but if you're going to make a case for it, starting off with 2 wins over Max Holloway, even if one's debatable, is a good place to start. So, you know, I think it's going to be hard for AJ McKee to find success against those top guys. But to your point, I like and to what I said earlier, he's I think he's definitely top 5 in the world, and I think he definitely, if he went to the UFC or fought the guys in the UFC, that would just be even more of a murderer's road than it already is. Because I know there's a lot of talks about stacked divisions, especially between bantam, feather, and lightweight, and feather's kind of a bit more top loaded with a bit less talent. He's a guy I'd like to see come to the UFC, like really test your talent against, like you said, the best featherweight division in the world. Because as much as I respect Pitbull, I respect Emmanuel Sanchez, I respect guys like Mads Burnell who all fought on the card, but you know, it's pretty simple, cut and dry to say they're not at the same caliber as the top level UFC talent. And we don't know how they would do within the UFC's top 15. But AJ McKee is a guy that looks like he has all the tools to be successful when you talk about Bellator champions coming over.
Yeah, I think it really does go weight class by weight class when you're comparing the promotions. And again, I think featherweight is just, it might be the best division in the world right now, the UFC featherweight division. So to compare, it's the most difficult, I think. Um, and then because it's so stacked, like as great as AJ McKee has looked, he's not as, and like we talked about earlier, 18-0 in Bellator, as great as that is and as impressive as that is, he's not as battle tested as those guys like Volkanovski, Max Holloway, and all those other featherweights in the UFC. Even someone like Korean Zombie, I would be hard pressed to make a prediction for that fight. Um, because the thing is, like in the UFC, they all those guys have fought each other and they've tested themselves against each other. Um, you know, it's debatable who the greatest featherweight of all time is, but top 3 in whatever order you want to put it, Jose Aldo, Max Holloway, and Volkanovski probably, right? And
Yeah.
2 of the 3 are at the top of the featherweight division today. So to make the transition today would be very, very difficult in my opinion. If you look at AJ McKee's record, obviously Pitbull is his biggest win yet. Darren Caldwell is no joke. He's a great fighter as well. That's a really great win and a very creative win. As you go down the line though, it's not really comparable to the guys that Max Holloway had to fight to come up, the guys Volkanovski had to fight to come up. So yeah, I think it's a very difficult comparison. Difficult kind of. It would be hard to pick him if he were to make that transition. And also he's such a new age kind of like creative guy, right? And a lot of we've talked about this, and that I love the creative fighters, and I put a lot of stock into creativity. It's very, very different to pull off and be creative against guys at 2 different levels. Like the things like the McKeotine, love it. I was a massive fan of that. I love seeing things like that, innovative techniques, innovative submissions. I'd be hard pressed to see him doing something like that against the likes of someone like Ortega. You know what I mean?
Yeah, for sure. To kind of kind of, oh my lord, I'm forgetting my word here, but to kind of continue on with your point there of 18-0 Bellator is great. Justin Gaethje came over to the UFC. He was 22-0 in World Series of Fighting, which one of those things that, yeah, that's great, but once that 0 on your record really is going to be tested once you enter the top level of talent. And for anybody listening, I know we're talking about greatest featherweights of all time. I don't want anybody to think we're discarding Uriah Faber. I would put him in my top 3 greatest featherweights of all time as well.
3
Top 3, yeah. Oh, over
over
Volkanovski.
Volkanovski.
I love Volkanovski, and I
Okay.
would say he needs,
Well,
because you got to think about Uriah Faber's WEC
yeah,
career.
I would say greatest. Yeah, Uriah, best of all time, skill wise. I would put Volkanovski
Oh,
in there.
Volkanovski. Yeah, for sure. But
Yeah.
yeah, yeah, like I think yeah, AJ McKee definitely if he went to the UFC, I know he seems to be eyeing these super fights, and I wonder if that's just because he has more contract in Bellator, or a lot of the discussion with fighter pay. I know Bellator athletes get paid a lot better than UFC athletes do, especially at that top level. So you know, but also to a point you made, you said there's a lot of Bellator's talent is homegrown, right? Well, to kind of play devil's advocate here, um, what about all the light heavyweight, or I would say higher weight class talent that has actually come over from other promotions and is now insanely extraordinarily successful in Bellator? Because I remember always viewing Bellator as a place that had to thrive off of other people's retiring fighters. And now, more recently, they've been able to get more of their own talent, like AJ McKee, Yamauchi, Pitbull, but that's kind of something we've seen in the lower weight classes. Even when we look at Sergio Pettis and the new Bellator bantamweight champion, he's a UFC retiree. So I'd like to see actually, like, counter to your point, I'd like to see them grow up with more homegrown talent, because when you look at AJ McKee, he's a young guy. He's only 26 years old. He's 18-0, and he's 18-0 in the promotion. Bring out more guys like that, and now Bellator is going to have a bigger brand, because you're not just saying, "Hey, we're going to pick up the guys that the UFC is." I don't want to say throwing out, but we're going to pick up the guys that have obviously ended their UFC tenure and have less of a chance of getting back.
Well, yeah, and like you pointed out, I think it's about the lighter weight classes versus the heavier weight classes. Historically, heavyweights and higher weight fighters, they excel later into their age. You know what I mean? Because the style is more dictated by power. You're not if there's wear and tear on the muscles, you can kind of negate that aspect, because you're not going there to be the fastest heavyweight in the world. You're probably going in there to be powerful, strong, and technical all the way through all weight classes. But I think it doesn't favor the young man like the lower weight classes do. Not saying you need to be like 20 in the lower weight classes or anything, but
Yeah,
the heavyweights are typically older than the lower weight classes. Which is
yeah,
why I think you see more of the fighters who've been around the sport in other promotions end up in Bellator later on, and also why you're starting to see more of the younger talent come up in Bellator at the lower weight classes as well.
yeah, for sure. Um, so do you have any closing thoughts? I know this is Bellator's biggest card, big call outs. It was an absolutely great card. And there was tons of big finishes. Do you have any closing thoughts? Anything you're thinking about?
I think we covered a lot. Obviously, I'm a big Goiti Yamauchi fan. I'd love to see him fight for the title in the next year or two. In the next few fights, I mean, I think he's right there, and I think he's one of the most interesting submission artists with now some of the most fascinating aspects of striking into his style now as well. So I'd love to see that coming up. And yeah, I think like you said, AJ McKee, he's right at the doorstep of that massive breakthrough stardom. He's starting it off really crazy, winning that belt in that fashion. Um, but I think he's a guy that'll be very interesting to watch from now on as well.
Yeah, I completely agree. The only thing I would think is, and I know you touched on it earlier in the podcast, is I'm really interested to see what happens at lightweight now in Bellator, because obviously I think that's the next step, the next logical step for Pitbull. I'd be really interested to see what goes on there, and who he's going to be looking to fight there.
For sure. All right. I guess with that, we will wrap it up. Don't worry, guys. Zach will be back hopefully next episode. You know what? He will be back next episode. We'll make sure of it. But yeah, this is a great one. Good Bellator recap. And all right. See you guys later.